What if the scars you carry could heal a broken community? Clara Bennett stepped out of her weathered Toyota RAV4, her boots crunching against the gravel of Eastview High School's parking lot in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Her fingers brushed the faded scar on her collarbone, a haunting memento from her days in Iraq, before she straightened her jacket and grabbed a worn leather binder from the passenger seat. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of autumn leaves, but Clara's heart was heavy. For months into her role as principal, she still felt the weight of her past. 18 years in the U.S. Army, where she'd risen to major and led soldiers through 3 grueling combat tours. Now, she faced a new war zone, a crumbling school with a 50% dropout rate, rampant violence, and a faculty teetering on despair. As Clara crossed the lot, her sharp eyes caught the spray-painted walls, their jagged letters screaming defiance, and the shattered windows on the 3rd floor, glinting like broken promises in the morning sun. A cluster of teens loitered near the entrance, their cigarette smoke curling into the air like ghosts of their lost potential. "Morning," she said, her voice steady but commanding, locking eyes with each student. They shuffled awkwardly, dousing their cigarettes, her presence alone demanding respect. Inside, her assistant, Melissa, handed her a stack of disciplinary reports, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. "4 fights yesterday, Ms. Bennett." Melissa sighed, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "And the Department of Education called about our scores, again." Clara nodded, her mind racing, the weight of her mission pressing down like a lead cloak. She'd scheduled a faculty meeting for 4 p.m., determined to rally her team, even the elusive Professor Daniels, who always skipped Fridays. But as she sat at her desk, memories of Fallujah flooded back, losing 3 soldiers under her command, the guilt that followed, and the PTSD that still woke her in cold sweats, her screams swallowed by the darkness of her empty apartment. Why had she chosen this path? During her recovery, mentoring young veterans had ignited a fire in her, to guide those the world had given up on, to show them they were more than their mistakes. Eastview High was her new battlefield, a place where hope had withered, but where Clara saw seeds waiting to bloom. Now, imagine you're Clara, standing at the edge of this chaotic school, your past whispering doubts in your ear. What would you do next? Would you confront the faculty head-on, risking their resistance to your bold ideas, or start with the students, building trust from the ground up? Drop your choice in the comments below, and let's see what you do in Clara's shoes. If stories like this ignite your curiosity, please hit that subscribe button for daily narrated stories. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, and your support means the world to us. At 4 p.m., the auditorium buzzed with tension as Clara stepped onto the stage, her boots echoing on the wooden floor like a metronome counting down to a battle. Every teacher was present, even Professor Daniels, who slouched in the back row, arms crossed, his graying beard twitching with irritation. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and nervous anticipation, the kind Clara had felt before missions in Iraq. Except this time, her enemies weren't insurgents but skepticism and despair. "Good afternoon, everyone," Clara began, her voice calm but firm, slicing through the murmurs like a blade. She scanned faces that ranged from intrigued to openly hostile, her hazel eyes lingering on each teacher as if memorizing their fears. "In my 4 months here, I've seen dedicated educators struggling against impossible odds, students with untapped potential slipping through the cracks, and a system that's failing us all." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of truth, as she let the silence stretch, giving the room a moment to feel the gravity of their shared struggle. Edward Lawson, a veteran counselor with 22 years at Eastview, coughed pointedly, his sharp blue eyes narrowing beneath his wire-rimmed glasses. "With respect, Principal Bennett, we've known this for years. We need funds, not more evaluations." His voice carried the bitterness of a man who'd seen too many promises broken, too many principles come and go with nothing to show for it. Clara's jaw tightened, her fingers brushing the edge of her binder as a flicker of Fallujah crossed her mind. The moment she'd lost Martinez to an IED, the guilt that still clawed at her chest. She pushed the memory down, her military training kicking in like a reflex. "I agree, Mr. Lawson, resources are critical, but strategy and leadership are the foundation." She passed out a detailed packet, her voice steady as she introduced the Horizon Initiative, a revitalization plan built on mentorship, restorative justice, and community partnerships. Each teacher received a copy, the rustle of paper filling the room like a chorus of whispers, as if the documents themselves were pleading for a chance. English teacher Sarah Mitchell skimmed the pages, her brow furrowing, her glasses slipping down her nose as she scribbled notes in the margins. Sarah was a quiet woman, her auburn hair always pulled into a tight bun, but her passion for literature shone through in the way she spoke to her students, soft, yet fierce, like a mother protecting her children. "This is thorough," Sarah said, her voice tinged with cautious hope. "But how do we fit this into our already packed schedules?" Clara nodded, expecting the pushback, her mind racing to find the right words. "We'll restructure schedules and roles to make it work," she replied, her tone collaborative, her eyes meeting Sarah's with a quiet promise of support. Lawson scoffed, his chair creaking as he leaned forward, his voice dripping with disdain. "Typical military mindset, thinking you can bark orders and we'll all fall in line." The room fell silent, some expecting Clara to lash out, their breaths held as if waiting for an explosion. Instead, she smiled faintly, her eyes glinting with resolve, a soldier's calm in the face of chaos. "Mr. Lawson, I learned in the Army that no battle is won without a united team. Orders without buy-in lead to resentment. This is a shared mission." Her voice softened, the words carrying the weight of a lesson learned through blood and loss, as she let the room absorb the depth of her intent. For the next 45 minutes, Clara outlined the plan, addressing concerns and weaving in teacher feedback, her voice a steady anchor in the storm of skepticism. She spoke of mentorship, each teacher guiding 12 students, becoming their compass in a world that had lost its way. She detailed restorative justice circles, where conflicts would be resolved through dialogue, not punishment, a method she'd seen heal fractured units in the Army. And she proposed community partnerships, inviting local businesses to offer internships, giving students a glimpse of a future beyond the streets. David Harper, the math teacher, nodded thoughtfully, his wiry frame leaning forward in his chair, his dark eyes bright with interest. David was a newer teacher, only 3 years at Eastview, but his optimism hadn't yet been crushed by the system. He'd grown up in Harrisburg, the son of a factory worker, and he saw his own struggles in his students. The hunger, the fear, the desperate need for someone to believe in them. "I like the mentorship idea," David said, his voice quiet but firm. "I've got a student, Ethan Carter, who's struggling. This could help him." Clara seized the opening, her heart lifting at the first sign of genuine support. "Thank you, David. Let's discuss Ethan's case later. I'd like your input." By the end, even the doubters seemed open to trying, their skepticism softening into curiosity, though Lawson's scowl remained. "I don't expect overnight success," Clara concluded, her voice steady but warm, her hands resting on the podium as if grounding herself. "Give me 1 semester. If we see no results, I'll pivot. I'm asking for your trust, not your blind obedience." The word trust lingered in the air, a fragile bridge between her and the room, as she stepped off the stage, her boots echoing once more, a reminder of the soldier she'd been and the leader she was becoming. In the hallway after, Lawson cornered her, his tone sharp, his breath smelling faintly of coffee and frustration. "Nice speech, Principal. You almost had me. But I've seen your type. Soldiers, CEOs, dreamers. All fail here." His words stung, but Clara met his gaze, unflinching, her hazel eyes steady as stone. "They failed because they didn't understand Eastview isn't a battlefield or a boardroom. It's a community on the edge. I'm here to rebuild, not command." Her voice softened, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through her armor, as she thought of the soldiers she'd lost, Martinez, O'Connor, Lee, and the promise she'd made to herself. No one else would fall on her watch. Lawson's expression didn't soften, but he stepped back, his silence a grudging acknowledgement of her resolve. Over the next weeks, Clara rolled out the Horizon Initiative, her days a whirlwind of meetings, planning, and quiet moments of doubt. Teachers mentored 12 students each, their relationships growing through shared lunches and late-night check-ins. David Harper threw himself into the program, his classroom becoming a haven for his mates, including Ethan Carter, a junior with a sharp mind but a troubled heart. Ethan's mother worked night shifts at a diner, leaving him to care for his younger siblings, a burden that had led him to steal food from the cafeteria just to eat. David saw the hunger in Ethan's eyes, not just for food, but for hope, and he spent hours tutoring him, teaching him algebra as a way to solve not just equations, but the chaos of his life. "You're more than your mistakes, Ethan," David would say, his voice gentle, his hand resting on the boy's shoulder as Ethan's eyes welled with tears he refused to shed. Schedules were adjusted for conflict resolution circles, where students and teachers sat in a circle, passing a small stone as a talking piece, sharing their fears and frustrations. Melissa, Clara's assistant, facilitated many of these circles, her soft voice and warm smile a balm for the students' raw emotions. Melissa had been at Eastview for a decade, her curly brown hair always tied back with a colorful scarf, her desk a clutter of photos of her own children. She'd seen the school's decline, but she'd never lost her belief in its potential, a belief Clara now leaned on. In one circle, a student named Jada broke down, her voice trembling as she admitted to starting a fight out of fear of being seen as weak, fear of failing her family. Melissa reached for Jada's hand, her touch steady, her eyes brimming with empathy. "You're not alone, Jada," she whispered, her words a lifeline in the storm of the girl's shame. Local businesses offered internships, giving students a glimpse of a future beyond the streets. A move that brought a rare smile to Sarah Mitchell's face as she watched her students return from their first day at a local bookstore, their eyes alight with possibility. And students formed squads to maintain the school, painting over graffiti, sweeping hallways, planting flowers in the courtyard, though not without pushback. "You're turning my son into a janitor," a father roared at a PTA meeting, his voice trembling with indignation, his fists clenched as he stood in the crowded gymnasium. Clara's response was measured, her tone warm, her hands clasped in front of her as if in prayer. "I'm teaching shared responsibility. In the army, even generals clean their spaces. It's about pride, not punishment." Her words carried the weight of a lesson forged in the crucible of war, a reminder that dignity comes not from rank, but from care for one another. Slowly, change took root. Attendance rose, vandalism dropped, and classrooms hummed with focus, the air filled with the sound of pencils scratching and voices raised in discussion. But resistance lingered, especially from Lawson, who seized every setback to undermine her at board meetings, his voice a constant drumbeat of doubt. "This won't last," he'd say, his arms crossed, his eyes cold. "You're setting us up for failure." Clara felt the weight of his words, each one a stone on her chest, but she pressed on, her resolve a fire that refused to die. One rainy afternoon, as Clara stood at her office window, watching the droplets trace paths down the glass, she thought of the ancient philosopher Heraclitus. "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and he's not the same man." She'd changed since Iraq, her scars a map of battles fought and lessons learned, but so had Eastview. Wasn't that the essence of redemption, not erasing the past, but building something new from its ashes? The rain blurred the world outside, a mirror to her thoughts, as she wondered if true change was possible, not just for the school, but for herself. Could she outrun the ghosts of Fallujah, or would they always follow her, whispering that she'd failed those who needed her most? One evening, as Clara reviewed progress reports, she paused on Ethan Carter's file, her fingers tracing the edges of the page as if searching for answers in its creases. Ethan's mother, a single parent working night shifts, had left him to fend for himself, a burden that had led him to petty crime to afford food. Clara pictured Ethan's hollow eyes, the way his hands shook when he was caught, and her heart ached, a sharp, familiar pain that echoed her past. She recalled a young soldier in her unit, Private Ellis, who'd turned to theft in desperation, only to thrive after she'd given him a second chance. Ellis had been 19, barely older than Ethan, with a laugh that could light up a barracks and a fear of failure that mirrored her own. She'd caught him stealing rations, his hands trembling as he begged for mercy, and instead of reporting him, she'd sat with him, listening to his story, a father in prison, a mother struggling to feed his siblings. "You're enough," she'd told him, her voice firm, her hand on his shoulder, and he'd gone on to become one of her best soldiers, until an RPG took him in Fallujah. Her throat tightened, the memory a knife in her chest, as she whispered to the empty room, "I won't lose you too, Ethan." The turning point came when Ethan was caught selling vape pens in the gym locker room, the air thick with the scent of sweat and rebellion. Lawson demanded immediate expulsion, his voice booming through the office as he slammed a fist on Clara's desk. "This is a safety issue, Principal. We can't coddle criminals." His words echoed the voices of her past commanders, the ones who'd taught her that discipline meant punishment, not redemption. But Clara had learned a different lesson in the sands of Iraq, that true strength lies in seeing the potential beneath the pain. She reviewed Ethan's file, noting his sharp mind and rare moments of engagement in history class, her fingers lingering on a note from Sarah Mitchell. Ethan wrote a brilliant essay on the Civil War. When he's focused, he shines. "I'm issuing a restorative contract instead," Clara decided, her voice resolute despite Lawson's glare, her hands steady as she signed the document. Expulsion just pushes him deeper into trouble. The room fell silent, the weight of her decision a tangible thing, as Lawson's face reddened, his anger a storm she refused to weather. The Carter contract, as it became known, set strict terms: mandatory attendance, weekly counseling, community service, and mentorship with David Harper. David took the role seriously, his classroom a sanctuary for Ethan, who slowly began to open up, his defiance melting into determination, though not without stumbles. One afternoon, David found Ethan sitting alone in the courtyard, his head in his hands, the weight of his responsibilities pressing down on his thin shoulders. "I can't do this," Ethan muttered, his voice breaking, the sound of a boy on the edge of surrender. David sat beside him, the grass damp beneath them, the air heavy with the scent of impending rain. "You're stronger than you think," David said, his voice soft but firm, his hand resting on Ethan's back. "I grew up like you, hungry, scared, angry. But someone gave me a chance, and I'm here to give you one too." Ethan looked up, his eyes red but hopeful, a spark igniting in the darkness of his despair, as David's words became a lifeline he couldn't ignore. Late that night, alone in her office, Clara sat with Ethan's file, her hands trembling as memories of Iraq surged like a tidal wave, threatening to drown her. She saw the faces of her fallen soldiers, Martinez, O'Connor, Lee, etched in her mind, their laughter haunting her like a melody she couldn't forget. Martinez had been the Joker, always cracking wise even in the worst firefights, his grin a beacon in the chaos. O'Connor had been the quiet one, a poet who wrote letters to his sister every night, his words a tether to a world beyond the war. And Lee had been the youngest, barely 18, with a smile that reminded Clara of her own brother, a smile that had faded when an IED tore through their convoy. What if she'd made a different call that day in Fallujah? What if she'd been faster, smarter, better? Her chest tightened, a familiar panic rising, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she gripped the edge of her desk, the wood cool against her palms. She forced herself to breathe, whispering, "Not this time. Not this time." She jotted in her journal, her pen scratching against the paper like a heartbeat. "I can't save them, but I can save him. I have to. If I fail Ethan, I fail them all over again." The weight of her past pressed down, a boulder on her shoulders, but so did her resolve. She wouldn't let another soul slip away, not while she still had breath in her lungs. For months into the Horizon Initiative, local news reported a 35% drop in disciplinary incidents and a 20% rise in attendance, the numbers a quiet victory in a war that felt endless. The district superintendent visited, his polished shoes clicking on the linoleum as he toured the school, visibly impressed. "This model could transform our district," he said at a board meeting, his voice booming with approval, his eyes alight with ambition. Lawson, however, was furious, his frustration a storm that refused to break, confronting Clara in the parking lot as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. "You think you're a hero, fixing everything?" he spat, his voice raw with anger, his hands clenched at his sides. "You're turning this school into a boot camp." Clara inhaled deeply, the scent of rain-soaked asphalt grounding her, her heart pounding as she faced him. "You've judged me since day one, Edward, seeing only my uniform. My vision isn't blind obedience. It's a community where accountability and support coexist, where we lift each other up, not tear each other down. Her words were a quiet plea. A bridge extended across the chasm between them. As she stood tall, her scar catching the fading light, a reminder of the battles she'd fought and the ones she still faced. As Clara stood there, the wind whispering through the trees, she thought of Nietzsche's words, "That which does not kill us makes us stronger." But what are the things that kill us slowly? She wondered. The guilt, the doubt, the fear of failure. Perhaps true strength wasn't in surviving the blow, but in rising from the ashes, in finding purpose in the pain. She looked at Lawson, his face a mask of frustration, and saw not an enemy, but a man who'd fought his own battles, a man who needed to believe in something greater than despair. Could she be that beacon for him, as she was trying to be for her students? Their argument was cut short by the sound of breaking glass, a sharp, jarring crack that shattered the evening's fragile peace. Teens were smashing the newly repaired windows of the admin building, their laughter a cruel symphony in the twilight. "You're perfect students, Principal," Lawson sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm, his arms crossed as he stepped back, content to watch her fail. Clara sprinted toward the group, her boots pounding against the pavement, her heart racing as adrenaline surged through her veins, the soldier in her awakening with a fierce clarity. She recognized two expelled students, now gang members, their faces hardened by the streets. But one stood out. Derek Hayes, a known dealer who lingered near Eastview, his presence a shadow that refused to fade. Derek stood apart from the others, a brick clutched in his hand, his dark eyes glinting with malice, his leather jacket stained with the grime of the streets. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar across his cheek that told stories of fights Clara could only imagine. The famous soldier Principal, Derek mocked, his voice a low growl, his lips curling into a sneer as he stepped closer, the brick raised like a weapon. The air between them crackled with tension, the scent of gasoline and smoke lingering as the other vandals scattered, their laughter fading into the distance. Clara's heart thundered, her training kicking in as she assessed the threat. Derek's stance, his grip on the brick, the flicker of rage in his eyes. "Derek, you're on school grounds. Leave now, or this escalates," she said, her voice steady, her hands loose at her sides, ready to move if needed. The words hung between them, a challenge and a plea, as the wind picked up, carrying the distant wail of sirens. Derek laughed, a harsh, guttural sound that echoed in the empty lot, stepping closer until he was mere feet away, his breath hot with defiance, his eyes searching hers for weakness. "I heard you're messing with my business, getting my clients to quit. You think you can save them?" His voice was a blade, sharp and cutting, but beneath it, Clara heard something else. Pain, raw and unfiltered, the sound of a boy who'd been broken by the world. David and Melissa watched from a distance, tense, their faces pale in the fading light, while Lawson dialed the police, his voice a murmur against the chaos. Derek loomed closer, his shadow falling over Clara, his voice a low growl that sent a shiver down her spine. "You know what happens to people who cross me?" He raised the brick higher, his knuckles white, his body coiled like a spring ready to snap. Clara's pulse roared in her ears, her body screaming to react, to disarm him as she'd been trained, but she held her ground, her years in combat giving her an unshakable calm. She saw the boy beneath the bravado, the one who'd lost his mother to addiction, who'd dropped out at 15 to survive, who'd chosen the streets because he believed he had no other choice. "They offer better options, like a life that doesn't end in a cell or a grave," she replied, her voice soft but firm, her eyes locking onto his with a quiet intensity. Derek froze, his arm trembling, the brick still raised, as her words pierced through his armor, striking at the heart of his fears. "You don't know me," he spat, but his voice cracked, the sound of a boy on the edge, his eyes flashing with a mix of rage and vulnerability. Clara took a step closer, her boots crunching on the gravel, her heart pounding as she spoke, her voice a lifeline in the storm of his anger. "I know you, Derek. I know you dropped out at 15 after your mom overdosed. I know you've got a sister, Lila, here at Eastview, who idolizes you. You're breaking her future by breaking these windows." Her words hit him like a punch, his grip on the brick faltering, his eyes widening at the mention of Lila, a name that carried the weight of his shame and his love. "Leave her out of this," he roared, his voice breaking, his chest heaving as he fought the tears that threatened to spill. "I can't," Clara said, her voice steady, her hands outstretched as if offering peace. "While you're out here destroying her future by destroying the school trying to educate her. We're fighting to keep her from following your path." For a moment, time stopped, the world narrowing to the space between them, the tension a living thing that pulsed with every heartbeat. Derek's arm shook, the brick a symbol of his rage, his pain, his defiance, but also his fear. Fear of a future he couldn't see, fear of a past he couldn't escape. Then, with a guttural cry, he hurled the brick at a nearby window, the glass shattering in a symphony of destruction, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet evening. "That's a warning," he snarled, his voice raw, his eyes burning with a mix of defiance and despair, before he turned and fled, his figure disappearing into the shadows as the sirens grew louder, a haunting promise of more to come. Rumors spread like wildfire the next day. Derek was planning something bigger, maybe an attack on the school to send a message, a final act of defiance to prove he couldn't be tamed. Teachers whispered nervously in the staff room, their voices a low hum of fear, their eyes darting to the windows as if expecting Derek to appear at any moment. Melissa clutched her coffee mug, her hands trembling, her scarf slipping from her hair as she spoke to Sarah. "What if he comes back with more of them?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her fear a tangible thing that filled the room. Sarah, usually so composed, bit her lip, her hands twisting the hem of her sweater, her mind racing with images of her students caught in the crossfire. "We have to trust Clara," she said, but her voice lacked conviction, her eyes betraying the doubt that gnawed at her heart. Clara met with the police, providing descriptions but insisting on handling student involvement internally, her voice calm but firm, her hands steady as she spoke. "We can't ignore attacks on public property," Officer Daniels argued, his badge glinting in the fluorescent light, his face a mask of frustration. "I'm not suggesting we ignore them, officer," Clara replied, her tone measured, her eyes meeting his with a quiet resolve. "I'm suggesting an approach that solves the problem, not just its symptom." Her words were a challenge, a call to see beyond the immediate, to believe in a solution that didn't just punish, but healed. Back in the office, she found Lawson waiting, visibly shaken, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his shoulders hunched as if carrying the weight of his own doubts. "He could have hurt you out there. You didn't even flinch," he said, his voice low, his eyes searching hers for answers. Clara's voice was quiet but firm, her hands resting on her desk, the wood a grounding force against the storm of her emotions. "I've faced worse. Escalation doesn't solve problems, it creates them." Lawson ran a hand through his thinning hair, his tone softer, his defenses crumbling in the face of her unwavering calm. "I thought you were just another rigid outsider. But what I saw wasn't just discipline, it was understanding." The next crisis hit when Lila Hayes was found crying in the cafeteria, surrounded by students taunting her about Derek, their voices a cruel chorus that cut through the hum of lunchtime chatter. "Your brother's a coward," ran from the principal. A boy sneered, his laughter sharp and biting, his friends joining in as Lila shrank into herself, her small frame trembling, her dark braids falling over her face like a shield. Clara and Lawson intervened together. A first, their steps synchronized as they crossed the cafeteria, their presence a quiet storm that silenced the room. "Enough," Clara said, her voice firm, her eyes flashing with a protective fire as she motioned for David to take the students to detention, his face a mask of quiet anger as he led them away. David's hands were gentle but firm, his voice low as he spoke to the students, his words a reminder of the consequences of cruelty. Clara and Lawson took Lila to a quiet room, the air heavy with the scent of chalk and old books, the walls lined with faded posters of inspirational quotes. Lila, a thin 13-year-old with red-rimmed eyes, sat huddled in a chair, her knees drawn to her chest, her hands clutching a crumpled tissue. She refused to speak at first, her silence a wall that Clara recognized all too well. The silence of a child who'd seen too much, felt too much, lost too much. "Lila," Clara began, her voice gentle, her hands resting on her knees as she knelt beside the girl. "What happened outside wasn't your fault." Her words were a soft invitation, a door cracked open, as she waited for Lila to step through. Lila's voice trembled, barely above a whisper, as she finally spoke, her words spilling out like a dam breaking. "Everyone says Derek's a thug, that he'll die or go to jail." Her tears fell freely now, each one a testament to the weight she carried, the fear that her brother was lost to her forever. Lawson knelt beside her, his voice gentle, his hands resting on the back of her chair, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of her grief. "Lila, I've never lied to you in 4 years, right?" he asked, his blue eyes soft, his tone warm, a stark contrast to the man who'd once been Clara's fiercest critic. Lila nodded, her braids bouncing slightly, her eyes meeting his with a flicker of trust. "Then hear me now," Lawson continued, his voice steady, his words a promise. "Derek's on a dark path, but that's not who you are," Clara added, her voice a quiet echo, her hand resting lightly on Lila's shoulder, the touch a lifeline in the darkness. "And he can still change, Lila. I believe that." Lila's tear-streaked face lifted, her eyes wide with shock, her voice trembling as she spoke. "You don't hate him after what he did?" Clara shook her head, her heart heavy, her scar throbbing as if in response to the girl's pain. "I hate his choices, not him. People can always find a way back." The words were a vow, a promise forged in the fires of her own redemption, as she looked at Lila, seeing not just a girl, but a future worth fighting for. As they sat there, the room silent save for Lila's soft sniffles, Clara thought of Plato's allegory of the cave, the shadows on the wall, the prisoners who mistook them for reality, the painful journey into the light. Wasn't that what she was doing here, guiding these students out of the shadows of their past, into the blinding light of possibility? But the light hurt, didn't it? It burned away the illusions, forced you to see the truth of yourself, of the world, of the scars you carried. She looked at Lawson, his face softened by a newfound understanding, and wondered if he, too, was stepping into the light, leaving the shadows of his cynicism behind. Days later, Derek returned, not to fight, but to talk, his steps hesitant as he entered Clara's office, his leather jacket a stark contrast to the softness in his eyes. Their 2-hour meeting was tense, raw, and transformative, a dance of words and silences that left them both changed. Clara later gathered her team, David, Melissa, and Lawson, with a new proposal, the Expanded Horizon program, night classes for dropouts like Derek. "He wants to come back," she said, handing out a detailed plan, her voice steady, her hands steady as she spoke. Lawson frowned, his brow furrowing, his hands clutching the document as if searching for flaws. "He's a risk, violence, drugs, all of it." Clara nodded, her eyes meeting his with a quiet resolve. "That's why this program is separate, with strict oversight. I've got volunteers, veterans with teaching experience, and I'd like you, Edward, to lead the mentorship piece." Lawson blinked, stunned, his hands falling to his sides, the document a symbol of the trust she was placing in him. "Me? After everything?" Clara smiled, her scar catching the light, a testament to the battles she'd fought and the ones she'd won. "Exactly. You know this community better than I ever will." 3 months later, the program was thriving, a beacon of hope in a school that had once been a battleground. Derek returned, bringing 4 others, their journey marked by setbacks but also growth, their laughter and new sound in the halls of Eastview. One evening, Clara watched from her window as Lawson led a night class activity in the courtyard, Derek among them, his posture softer, his eyes brighter, a boy finding his way back to himself. David knocked softly, his frame filling the doorway, his face alight with pride as he handed her a newspaper. Educational Revival: How a Veteran Turned a Failing School Around. Clara chuckled, her laughter a rare, precious thing, her hands tracing the headline as if it were a map to her own redemption. A bit dramatic, but not wrong. David grinned, his eyes warm, his voice steady as he spoke. "Look at the stats. Dropouts down 40%, incidents down 47%, pass rates up 30%. But the real story is the people, Lawson, Derek, even you." Clara touched her scar, her voice soft, her heart full as she looked out at the courtyard, where hope was taking root, a garden grown from the ashes of despair. "I came here to atone for those I couldn't save. But it's more than that now. It's about empowering others to rise." At the first Expanded Horizon graduation, Clara and Lawson handed out certificates, the auditorium filled with applause, the air alive with the hum of possibility. Lawson's speech rang with conviction, his voice steady, his blue eyes shining with a newfound belief. Eastview was a place of failure. Now, it's a place of redemption, thanks to a principal who showed us that discipline without heart is oppression, but heart without structure is chaos. As they handed Derek his certificate, he paused, his hands trembling slightly, his dark eyes searching hers for answers. "Why did you care, Ms. Bennett?" "After all I did," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the crowd, his leather jacket a stark contrast to the hope in his gaze. Clara's eyes softened, her voice a quiet anchor in the storm of his emotions. "Because I've learned that our fiercest enemies are often fighting battles we can't see. Sometimes, they just need someone to believe they can win." Years later, as Clara prepared to leave Eastview for a role as district superintendent, the school was unrecognizable. Murals adorned the walls, their vibrant colors a testament to the students' creativity. Classrooms buzzed with purpose, and photos in the halls told stories of hope, each frame a chapter in a new legacy. On her desk sat two treasures, her military medals, their edges worn from years of reflection, and a framed photo of the first Expanded Horizon class, a testament to her journey from war to renewal. Lawson, the last to bid her farewell, smiled wryly, his wire-rimmed glasses glinting in the morning light, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "I thought you were my enemy when you arrived. Turns out, we were fighting the same war, just on different fronts." Clara adjusted her jacket, her scar now a badge of honor, no longer hidden but worn with pride. A good soldier turns foes into allies. A great principal shows people their worth beyond their mistakes. In the parking lot, Derek, now a college student and volunteer tutor, waved with a grin, his dark eyes bright with purpose, his leather jacket replaced by a university sweatshirt. "Still fighting the good fight, Principal?" Clara laughed, her heart full, the sound a melody of joy she hadn't known she could feel. "Always, Derek. It's the only fight worth winning." Her journey taught us all that courage isn't just in facing danger. It's in seeing potential where others see failure, in offering second chances when the world says it's too late. What second chance has changed your life? Share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear how hope has touched you, how you've risen from the ashes of your own battles. At Daily Narrated Stories, we bring you tales of resilience and transformation to inspire your own journey. Stories that remind us of the power of belief, the strength of community, and the beauty of second chances. Don't miss out. Subscribe now and help us reach 1,000 subscribers this month. Time's running out to join our community of dreamers and doers. Hit that button, leave a comment, and let's rise together, because everyone deserves the chance to rise again.